I still remember the smell of roasted coffee and warm bread in that restaurant. The way it wrapped around us as we were led to a small table near the window. It was supposed to be a simple lunch, nothing fancy. Just a quiet afternoon with my daughter-in-law. A small break from the heaviness that had been sitting on my chest for months. At my age, you learn to appreciate ordinary moments. A clean table, soft music, sunlight falling across polished cutlery. I had dressed carefully that morning, choosing a cardigan I hadn't worn in a while, telling myself it was good to look presentable, even if no one noticed. I wanted to feel normal, useful, included. My daughter-in-law chatted easily as we sat down, talking about errands, plans, things that didn't really concern me. I nodded, smiled when expected, listened more than I spoke. That had become my role over the years. I didn't mind, or at least I told myself I didn't. When the menus arrived, I hesitated before ordering. Old habits die hard. I glanced at prices, chose something modest, something that wouldn't feel like a burden. She ordered confidently without looking twice. I admired that ease. I used to have it once, before life taught me to calculate my worth in small choices. The food came quickly. We ate. For a few moments, everything felt light, almost pleasant. I laughed at something she said, surprising myself with the sound of it. I remember thinking, maybe today will be one of the good days. Maybe I'm finally allowed to just enjoy myself. Then the bill arrived. The waiter placed it neatly between us and smiled politely. My daughter-in-law reached for her bag without hesitation. I watched her swipe her card, still relaxed, still talking. The machine beeped once. Then again. Her smile faded slightly. She tried again. This time the machine made a sharper sound. The waiter glanced at the screen, then at her, his expression carefully neutral. "I'm sorry," he said gently. "It seems this card is blocked." Blocked. The word hit the table like something heavy and unwelcome. She laughed nervously, pulling out another card. "Try this one," she said, as if it were nothing. As if embarrassment wasn't already creeping up my spine, the second card failed too. The waiter's smile grew thinner, more professional. She turned to me then. "Do you have your card?" There it was. That familiar shift, that quiet expectation. I nodded and reached into my purse, my fingers suddenly clumsy. I had used that card countless times. Groceries, medicine, small comforts. It had never failed me before. I handed it over, trying to ignore the tightening in my chest. The machine beeped. Once, twice, then the same sharp sound. "I'm sorry," the waiter said again, his voice lower this time. "This one is blocked as well." For a moment the world seemed to pause. The clinking of plates, the murmur of other conversations, all of it faded into a dull hum. I felt heat rise to my face, a deep, humiliating warmth that had nothing to do with the room. Blocked. All of them. My daughter-in-law stared at the machine, then at me. "That's strange," she said. Not softly, not kindly. "Your cards were working yesterday, weren't they?" I swallowed. "Yes," I said quietly. "They were." The waiter shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "Is there another form of payment?" he asked. I shook my head slowly. Cash wasn't something I carried much anymore. I had been told it wasn't necessary, that everything was handled, that I didn't need to worry. My daughter-in-law sighed, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "This is embarrassing," she muttered, more to herself than to me. But I heard it. Of course I did. I felt small. Smaller than I had felt in years. As the waiter stepped away to give us a moment, my thoughts raced. Cards don't just block themselves. Something had changed. Something had been decided without me. And suddenly, sitting there with my untouched water glass and a bill I couldn't pay, I understood that this lunch was never just about food. It was about control. It was about how easily my independence could be switched off. Quietly, with a phone call I hadn't been part of, I folded my hands in my lap and stared at them. Old hands. Hands that had worked, cleaned, cooked, held children, wiped tears. Hands that had earned every bit of security I thought I had. Across from me, my daughter-in-law was already checking her phone, irritation written across her face. I wondered who she would call. Who would fix this? Who would be blamed? And in that moment, surrounded by strangers, and soft music and a bill, sitting like an accusation between us, something inside me began to crack. Not loudly, but enough to let the truth slip through. The silence that followed felt heavier than the bill itself. My daughter-in-law tapped her phone against the table, her fingers sharp and impatient. I sat still, my back straight. my eyes fixed on the small crack in the wooden tabletop, as if staring hard enough might make me disappear into it. Around us, life went on. A couple laughed at the next table. Someone called for dessert. No one noticed the quiet humiliation unfolding in the corner. Finally, the waiter returned. He asked again politely if there was anyone we could call. My daughter-in-law didn't look at me when she answered. She named someone else, someone younger, someone who still had control over things like bank accounts and decisions. The call was short. Too short. She ended it with a tight smile and said help was on the way. I nodded again. Nodding had become my specialty. As we waited, I felt the truth settling in my bones. I knew why the cards were blocked. I didn't need confirmation. Over the past few months, small things had been changing. Questions about my spending. Suggestions about simplifying finances. Gentle reminders that it was better if someone else handled things for me. I had agreed not because I was incapable, but because disagreement felt exhausting. Because saying no had started to feel like ingratitude. I remembered the day I had handed over access, convincing myself it was temporary. For safety, they said. For convenience. I remembered signing papers without fully reading them, trusting that family would never leave me helpless in public, in front of strangers, over something as small as lunch. Yet there I was. When the help finally arrived and the bill was paid, no one spoke much. My daughter-in-law avoided my eyes as we stood up. I thanked the waiter quietly, though I wasn't sure why. Habit, perhaps, apologizing for existing. Outside, the air felt colder. She walked ahead of me, her steps fast and irritated. I followed slower, my thoughts louder than my footsteps. Part of me wanted to ask questions, to demand explanations, to say this wasn't right. But another part of me, the part that had survived decades by staying quiet, told me to wait, to observe. The car ride home was silent. No music, no conversation, just the hum of the engine and the sound of my own breathing. I stared out the window, watching buildings blur past, thinking about how easily independence can be taken from someone once they're labeled old. Back at the house, she disappeared into another room, already on her phone again. I went to my small space and sat down on the edge of the bed. My purse lay open beside me, cards neatly tucked inside, suddenly useless. I picked one up and turned it over in my fingers, feeling foolish for ever thinking a piece of plastic represented security. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I lay awake replaying the scene in the restaurant again and again. The beep of the machine, the waiter's apologetic smile, the heat in my cheeks. But beneath the embarrassment, something else stirred. Anger, yes, but also clarity. I realized that the lunch wasn't an accident. It was a warning, a demonstration of how dependent I had become without noticing, how my life had slowly been reduced to permissions and approvals. The next morning I asked questions. Carefully at first, casually. I asked about the bank, about the cards, about why things had changed without my knowledge. The answers came wrapped in concern, in phrases like, "We thought it was best," and "You don't need to worry about these things." Each sentence felt like a door closing, softly but firmly. That afternoon I went for a walk by myself. I needed air, space. I walked slower than I used to, but every step felt intentional. I passed shops, cafes, people carrying their own worries, their own bags, their own money. I wondered how many of them had once trusted the wrong people too much. When I returned, I made a decision quietly, the way I had made so many decisions in my life. But this one felt different. This one wasn't about keeping peace. It was about reclaiming something I had lost. That evening, I sat at the table and wrote down everything I could remember. Account numbers, old contacts, names of places I had banked with before. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. I didn't need permission to think. For the first time since the restaurant, I felt steady. They may have blocked my cards, but they had not blocked my mind. And that, I realized, was where my freedom would begin again. The change didn't happen all at once. It never does. It came quietly, in moments no one else noticed. A phone call made alone. A visit taken without explanation. A question asked one too many times. I had learned patience over a lifetime. But now I learned something new, resolve. I went to the bank myself. No announcement. No permission. I dressed neatly, took my purse, and left the house as if I were going for a simple walk. The building was familiar, comforting in its order. When I explained my situation, the woman across the desk listened carefully. She didn't rush me. She didn't talk over me. She looked at me like a person who still had a mind of her own. And that made all the difference. Piece by piece, I rebuilt what had been quietly taken. Access restored, decisions returned. Boundaries drawn. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply stated what I wanted. By the time I left, my hands were steady again. That evening, when the questions came, I answered calmly. Yes, I had gone out. Yes, I had handled some things. No, I hadn't forgotten. The surprise on their faces was almost painful to watch. They weren't angry at first. They were confused. People often are when control slips from their hands. The real confrontation came later. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. I spoke about the restaurant, about the embarrassment, about how it felt to be unable to pay for my own lunch. I watched their expressions shift. Defensiveness, justification, discomfort. I didn't interrupt. I didn't argue. I just told the truth. For once, I didn't apologize. Silence filled the room when I finished. A heavy, revealing silence. I realized then that they had never expected me to speak like this. Age, they assume, weakens courage, but sometimes it sharpens it. Things didn't magically improve after that. Respect doesn't appear overnight, but something fundamental had changed. They knew I was paying attention now. They knew I would ask. They knew I would not quietly disappear into dependence again. I also changed the way I saw myself. I stopped shrinking. I ordered what I wanted when we went out. I carried cash again, not because I had to, but because I chose to. I kept copies of everything important. I reclaimed small routines that belonged only to me. Morning walks, afternoon tea, evenings with my thoughts. The memory of the restaurant still stings, but it no longer humiliates me. It reminds me that dignity is fragile if you don't protect it. That trust must be balanced with awareness. That growing old does not mean giving up control. It means guarding it more carefully. I don't know what the future holds. Bodies weaken. Circumstances change. That is unavoidable. But I know this. I will never again sit at a table and feel ashamed for something that isn't my fault. If my story teaches anything, let it be this. Age does not erase your right to independence. Silence does not mean consent. And sometimes, it takes one unpaid lunch to remind you that your life is still your own. The cards were blocked that day, but I walked away with something far more valuable: my voice.